It's the 1890s, and robbers Purvis and Buddy are seen looting from a man they had just killed. It's also revealed that there are others around that were looted by the duo. After stealing, Purvis tells Buddy that he hears horses coming.
What are your horses?
So Buddy suggests they take a different route to escape. Unfortunately for both of them, the route leads them to a Native American burial site. Purvis keeps telling Buddy that they have to turn around, but Buddy keeps insisting that they continue moving. Well, not until he's shot in the throat by an arrow. And then, suddenly, a mysterious shadow appears and attacks him while Purvis runs for his dear life.
Buddy!
Meanwhile, somewhere in Bright Hope, in the O'Dwyer's home, we see Samantha, the daughter and assistant of the town's doctor, and her husband Arthur, whom she's yelling at for sulking when it's his fault that he broke his legs trying to fix the roof during a storm. Also, Samantha is upset because his being injured has made it the longest they've ever spent since their marriage. She tries to get him to see that work isn't everything, and that he should just enjoy his stay with her for the coming 12 weeks of his recovery.
You're here with me.
That night, Purvis manages to reach the town of Bright Hope. He finds a huge tree and buries his loot beside it. But little does he know that he's being watched by Deputy Chicory. After Purvis wanders off, Deputy Chicory rushes to Sheriff Franklin's hut to report the issue. Seeing as he might be a threat, Sheriff Franklin follows Deputy Chicory to the tavern to interrogate Purvis. At the tavern, Sheriff Franklin starts to question Purvis, and sadly, Purvis doesn't do a great job of hiding his suspiciousness. When the sheriff asks for his name, he tells the sheriff that his name is Buddy.
Buddy.
Which is obviously a lie. But when it's revealed that he was caught burying things, Purvis tries to make a run for it. This leaves Sheriff Franklin with no choice but to shoot Purvis in the leg. Meanwhile, at the O'Dwyer's home, Samantha's busy tending to her husband when they hear a knock on the door and a voice that follows. The man introduces himself as Gunslinger John Bruder, so Samantha goes to get the door. John tells her about a certain drifter that was shot by the sheriff and that she's needed to extract the bullet. Samantha then tells Arthur that she'll be back after attending to the patient. After arriving at the office, Samantha realizes that she'll have to stay and monitor the patient's fever after the surgery. So she asks Franklin to let her husband know that she won't be returning tonight. On the other hand, everyone except Franklin's fellow deputy Nick and assistant Dr. Samantha is left behind to look after the criminal. From the office, Franklin goes to Samantha's house to inform her husband about his wife not coming home tonight. Afterward, he leaves. Meanwhile, some strange sounds can be heard at a nearby stable. The stable boy goes to check it out, but gets brutally attacked on the spot. The following morning, Franklin is with his wife, who's just recovering from a bad cold. He tries to convince her to get some rest, but she tells him that she feels a lot better. Just then, they hear a knock on the door.
Door's open.
A man named Clarence comes to report to the sheriff that he found the stable boy dead and strangely wounded. Franklin asks if it was done by a wild animal perhaps, but Clarence tells him he isn't sure because he didn't linger to find out. He also informs Franklin that after he saw the boy's body, he rushed to the office to report the case, but didn't find anyone or anything inside. This puts Franklin in a perplexed state, as he knows he left Samantha and Nick at the office last night. Franklin tells Clarence to go and fetch Chicory and meet him at the stables. Later, the three men meet at the stables to investigate the crime scene. Franklin wonders who on earth could have gruesomely harmed the poor stable boy. After checking out the scene of the crime and finding nothing, Franklin heads back to his office to find it completely empty, with an arrow left behind. He goes to inform Arthur about the situation.
Mrs. O'Dwyer was abducted.
And asks him to meet him at the tavern so they can discuss a plan of action. At the tavern, Franklin enlists the help of an educated Native American professor to examine the arrow. The professor informs him that the arrow belongs to a cannibalistic tribe called the Troglodytes. He points out their location on a map, which says that they live in a valley that will take 5 days to get to. But he also warns that the tribe is a group of inbred cannibals, feared by other native tribes. Franklin, however, deduces that the stable boy was killed, but he is certain that Samantha, Purvis, and Nick have been abducted. Ignoring the professor's warning, Franklin forms a search party consisting of himself, Chicory, and John. After bidding his wife goodbye, Franklin joins the men at the front of the office. Arthur also arrives with his horse, and despite his wounds, insists on joining their party to find his wife. Franklin warns Arthur that they're trying to make a 5-day ride into a 3-day ride and that it might be too strenuous for him. But seeing as he's unable to convince Arthur to stay behind, Arthur joins their search party. They immediately head out. And after hours of riding, they stop to water their horses. Later that night, they set up camp, where John sets up a trap in case of intruders. They then share a meal together before going to sleep. The following day, Arthur's wounds seem to be getting swollen and likely infected, but his ego doesn't let him tell the others. Franklin then insists that he let Chicory tend to him. Later that night, 2 strangers stumble across the party's camp. Franklin asks them to show their faces and asks them to drop their weapons. He then instructs them to move slowly towards them, but by doing so, the strangers get shot to death by John. John fears that they could have been scouts for a raid and warns the men to be more careful. Chicory, who's in doubt, goes to examine their bodies and realizes that John was wrong and might have put them in trouble for shooting them. The men then pack up camp to find a new place to set up. Led by John, they finally find another spot to set up their camp. But unfortunately, while they're asleep, they get ambushed by raiders.
Ambush!
Who injure John's horse and steal the rest. John's horse is still very much alive and struggling, but he has no choice but to put the creature out of its misery. The following morning, they head out on foot, making it very difficult for Arthur to keep up. He tells the others to keep going, and they'll catch up. And since they can't let Arthur slow them down, they leave. He treads the path alone, with his legs hurting and every passing minute making him want to give up. But he can't just leave Samantha like that. After a couple of hours, Arthur finally finds them resting. They break it to Arthur that they've been there for hours now and plan to leave by twilight. Arthur joins them anyway to catch his breath and eventually falls asleep. At twilight, Arthur gets woken up by the men, saying it's time to head out. But John points out the fact that Arthur is slowing them down because of his wounds. Arthur retaliates and the two get into a huge argument. Franklin tries to reason with Arthur, but Arthur takes it out on him too.
To hell with your authority and the way you've been doing things.
Franklin then asks Chicory to examine the wounds, but Arthur refuses initially. After throwing away his pride, Chicory examines his wounds, and Franklin realizes that Arthur will need surgery to prevent his wounds from getting worse. Thankfully, Chicory has the knowledge of medicine, so he helps Arthur with the surgery. Arthur then apologizes to all of them, and he asks Franklin to leave a trail, so if he wakes up, he can come after them. Franklin agrees, and with the help of John, he assists Chicory by holding Arthur down as the effect of the drug is slow to act. Later, Arthur is left to rest while the other 3 continue their journey. Late at night, they begin to hear howling trumpet-like sounds. John tells them that he had heard that sound on the day he went to raid some of the cannibals. When he's asked how many of them he took, John doesn't answer. The following day, the men finally arrive at the valley. They carry out a survey before going close to the cave. On reaching the foot, John tells them he'll head in first and give them a signal if the coast is clear. After heading in, Franklin and Chicory then wait for his signal before joining him. Unfortunately, that's when all 3 of them are ambushed by some of the troglodytes. Chicory and Franklin get shot in the arm, while John gets badly wounded. In any case, they manage to take down the troglodytes and rush to John's aid. John then requests a smoke. He also finally confesses to having killed more than 100 troglodytes that day and promises not to let any of the troglodytes through since he can't move with them anymore. Franklin then promises that his death won't be in vain. He and Chicory then continue ahead, but not long after they leave, another troglodyte does a sneak attack on John. Meanwhile, Franklin and Chicory immediately get ambushed by more troglodytes. After knocking them out, the troglodytes drag their bodies away. On their way to wherever the troglodytes were taking the men, at the foot of the cave, one of the troglodytes calls out with the same howl trumpet-like sound, and a rope is let down. Inside the cave, Franklin and Chicory see Samantha and Nick in a different cell. Samantha tells them to go into the cells or they'll pay dearly for resisting.
Go in or they'll kill you.
So the two men comply. Franklin asks her if she's okay, and she says yes. He then asks where Purvis is, and Samantha tells him that Purvis was eaten by the troglodytes. She also informs them that Nick is not well, but he's holding up. Not long after, Nick is dragged out of the cell and stripped of his clothes. Nick then informs Franklin about Purvis, who looted people and trespassed at the troglodytes' burial ground. He also pleads with Franklin to relay the message to his brother, and afterwards, he gets scalped. Later that night, Chicory asks Franklin what his backup plan is, but Franklin breaks it to him that there is no backup plan whatsoever. Samantha then asks after her husband, and Franklin tells her that he is alive and well. At first, Samantha is shocked that Arthur didn't come with them, but then Franklin tells her that he actually did come with them but had to stay behind because of his wounds. Chicory then adds that they left a trail for Arthur to follow, but this agitates Samantha, who claims they're leading her husband to this death trap. Suddenly, Franklin gets an idea. He tells her that they need to make things easier for Arthur so he has less to deal with when he eventually reaches them. He starts by asking how many troglodytes are here, after they have taken down 3 during the ambush, and Samantha informs them that there should be about 10 men and 2 pregnant cripples. He then wonders how many troglodytes they'll be able to finish off. Meanwhile, Arthur finally wakes up and realizes he has slept for too long. He quickly packs up his stuff and starts to follow the trails that were left behind by Franklin, John, and Chicory. Halfway through, Arthur tries to convince himself that his wounds would not stop him from going after Samantha. On the other hand, Franklin, with the help of Chicory, manages to trick 3 of the troglodytes into drinking the liquor laced with opium tincture. Samantha tells them that the first one drank enough to kill him, and the second one will only go unconscious, but the third will remain unharmed. On the other hand, Arthur follows the men's trail to the valley, where he's ambushed by 2 troglodytes, but barely manages to save himself. Thankfully, he discovers that they use an animal bone in their windpipes as their whistle and extract it from one of the troglodytes. Using the whistle, he attracts another troglodyte, which he shoots down and heads for the cave. He also realizes that the clutches are slowing him down, so he results in crawling. But at the cave, the troglodyte leader is angry at the prisoners for poisoning his men. As punishment, he cuts open Franklin's abdomen and shoves the heated liquor flask into the wound. He also figures out how to use their gun and shoots Franklin with it. Luckily, Arthur lures one out with the whistle and kills him before tricking the troglodyte leader, giving Franklin a chance to cut off his toes and finish him off. Samantha is more than surprised to see Arthur, as she calls out his name, and Arthur is glad that Samantha is still in good health. He then frees her and asks Franklin about the others, but Franklin tells him about their ill fate. Samantha then frees up Chicory, while Arthur asks Franklin if there's anything he can do for him. But Franklin tells him that their safety is his priority. He orders Chicory to escort the O'Dwyers home safely. He then instructs them to head out the same way Arthur came in. He holds onto his rifle and promises again to prevent Bright Hope from the terrors of the troglodytes. Afterwards, the 3 of them leave Franklin alone in the cave. On their way out, they see 2 pregnant troglodyte women with amputated limbs. At a distance away from the cave, Arthur blows on the troglodyte whistle, but doesn't get a response. With that, they head through the burial site to leave the place. At sundown, when they're pretty far away from the valley, just then the trio hear 3 gunshots coming from the valley. Now they're certain that all the troglodytes have been exterminated, and Franklin stayed true to his words, even in his dying moments. So they continue their journey. However, Chicory tosses a stone to the side, possibly leaving behind trails in hopes that Franklin can still make it. And this is the end. This was a recap of the 2015 movie Bone Tomahawk, written and directed by S. Craig Zeller, starring Kurt Russell, Patrick Wilson, Matthew Fox, Richard Jenkins, Lily Simmons, Evan John-Niket, David Arquette, and Sid Haig. So do you think that Arthur fulfilled all righteousness by joining the party to save his darling wife? And what do you think would have become of the men if they didn't let Arthur go with them? Let us know in the comments below with #CinemaRecap. Until next time.